Automating the right tasks in your business can be a huge time saver, but it's not without its drawbacks. And in today's episode, I want to talk about when we automate and when we don't. I want to talk about some tips for you as a business owner or a manager about what your involvement in creation of automations should and shouldn't be. And also delve into some of the big lessons that I've learned from spending the past 7 years automating many parts of our business. So the question is this: how do entrepreneurs like us who don't have an endless supply of cash, how do we leverage the best apps, virtual assistants, automation tools and systems to scale our businesses, increase our profits and have more time to do what we love to do each day? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name's Dr. Steve Day and this is Systemize Your Success. Okay, so the draw of automation is huge. The idea that we can get a machine to do huge amounts of our work for us is very, very appealing, but it isn't without problems. Setting up automations takes a huge amount of time, and if we don't have the process absolutely nailed before we automate it, then we end up automating something that's broken. And that just means we get lots of bad things happening rather than having a human involved who may actually spot them. So there are times when automation is the right thing to do and times when it's not. And a simple way of really making that decision, when should you automate something, is to make sure that you've actually done it first with a human. That way you can test out the process. You can see how time consuming it is. And especially for stuff that is done repetitively, you can then work out what the time saving would be if you actually automated it. Then you've got some data and you can say, yeah, actually, this is going to save us, 2 hours a week or 5 hours a week or whatever. It's worth spending 5 to 10 hours on setting up some automation because over the coming weeks, that will pay back in dividends. So having that data originally, or to begin with, about the actual time saving you're going to get is important. The other aspect of it is how boring and repetitive the work is, because if you can take off some incredibly annoying and mundane task from someone's workload, they're going to thank you for it. And they're going to be able to then focus their time on doing stuff that's more exciting and more energizing than just basically clicking buttons and pushing keys and whatever. So there are definitely benefits from a staff side as well, morale and motivation, and just allowing them to potentially get involved with that automation creation and then actually learn a new skill in the process. And there's also the productivity and the cost saving side as well. When you are thinking about setting up any automation, once you've decided, this is definitely something we're going to do repetitively, it's something that isn't going to change massively in the not too distant future, and it's definitely going to actually save us some time, then it's time to think about, how do I actually go about doing this? How do I set up this automation in my business? And if you're familiar with apps like Zapier or Make, or the automations built within your CRM system, then you'll know that actually thinking up the idea is only the start of the problem. You've then got to figure out how to actually make it work. And this often involves repetitive rounds of testing and retesting and tweaking and changing the formats of things. And basically what you think would be something relatively easy to create an automation for can sometimes take days or hours, if not days, to actually complete. A really good example was recently we've been setting up our new community platform. Super excited about launching this, but it's involved quite a lot of automation to migrate our existing clients over and to have a seamless onboarding experience for new clients coming in the future. And a lot of this has been totally new. We're using a new platform for our community, and we're trying to integrate it with actually a new-ish CRM for us. And so a lot of the learning involved in what is possible, what can we and can't we do, had to happen. We didn't know the answers to everything before we started. And so there was the option that I, as a business owner, jump in and try and figure it all out and see what works, see what doesn't. And I will hold my hands up that I did do some of that. I enjoy automation. It's one of the things that actually sucks me in and takes me away from doing maybe some of the stuff I should be doing, because I actually really, really enjoy it. And if that's you, you have to be careful, because it can sap huge amounts of your time, which you should potentially be spent doing more leadership type roles. But if you're like many of our clients who actually do not like automation, they like the results it gives them, but don't really want to spend the days, weeks, months, whatever, learning how to become, in effect, a no-code coder, then then actually having a really powerful, simple way of letting people know or telling people what you want them to set up in a meaningful, standardized and reproducible way is really, really important. We do this using process mapping. Now, process mapping is something that I've talked previously on the episode. It's something that we use heavily in our business. We use process mapping for mapping out pretty much any process that happens in our business, any step-by-step task that has multiple steps, maybe multiple people involved, maybe different apps involved, and be able to create a visual flowchart of what it is that's happening, when it happens, who's doing it, what the handovers are, the dates things happen, what things are triggered by certain things happening, etc., etc. Being able to map that out onto something that is visual, that is easy to understand, and that doesn't involve pages and pages of text is an incredibly powerful and useful skill. So you as a business owner or a manager, one of the things that I think investing your time into becoming a brilliant at, is actually mapping what's in your head out into a process map or a flowchart, so other people can understand what you're trying to achieve, what you are visualizing in your head. And that way you can then give that flowchart saying, look, this is what I want to happen. So for example, with creating our new community, and this task that I outsourced to one of my staff recently, or delegated to one of my staff recently, was we just basically onboarding new clients, but it wasn't quite as simple as that. They had to go into different spaces depending on, or different areas in the community depending on the subscription they have, and certain clients have certain privileges and they have to be dealt with, and then they have staff members which have to be linked by company name so we can track whose staff belong to which client, etc., etc. So there's lots of nuances that had to be dealt with, and we had to then think about how do we create a set of automations that allow all this to happen without human involvement, because this is repetitive stuff that we want to be able to scale. And so for us, there was a definite business case for it. But getting the detail about exactly what we wanted to happen was all in my head, because unfortunately I lost my operations manager end of last year, which meant and she was the person that had set up a lot of our previous automations. And so luckily she'd mapped them all out, but the person coming in hadn't really been involved with that mapping process. And I saw this as a huge opportunity for me to actually streamline massive amounts of what we've done, especially because we're using a new platform, a new CRM. And therefore I thought, look, this is the time when I can actually create the thing that I wanted to create, or I wish I'd created in the first place, but not knowing then what I know now, I wasn't able to. And so a lot of the stuff we've done had become a bit clunky, and I thought, right, great, I'm going to actually go ahead and use this opportunity to really streamline, to create a really fluid, easy to understand system or automation to actually get all this done. But, and this is the big but, is I could have jumped in and done all the work myself. And that would have got the same result. But A, it would have taken huge amounts of my time. And B, and this is the really important thing, my new ops manager would then not have understood all the automations and everything that had been set up because they hadn't been involved in the process. So what I did instead was to create a flowchart explaining exactly what I intended to happen. I looked at the old flowchart so I could see what was happening previously. So I'd basically pulled all the best ideas from there, thought about how I could actually just streamline the process, from what steps were important, what we could eliminate, and just create a simple flowchart saying, like, this is what I want you to go away and figure out. And then I handed that over to my ops manager and said, right, go and have a go at setting up these apps. Zaps are a name for Zapier. When you set up an automation in the tool called Zapier, we call them Zaps. And so she was then able to then go and figure out how to do this. And this was a massive learning curve for her. She hadn't done Zapier before, so it was an opportunity for her to really get into it, to understand how the automation tool works. And that for me is massively valuable, because going forward, when something breaks, she's going to be able to go in and fix it because she's the one that built it. And even when I've helped her out, and because I'm quite good at this stuff, so I was able to help her overcome some of the more challenging parts, but she was there involved in it, so she understands it now. And so the learning that she's gone through, for me as a business owner, is incredibly valuable. Yeah, it took time, And yeah, obviously that's time that she could have been spent doing other stuff, but actually this is a core part of her role. So her getting trained up by going through and building the stuff out, testing what works, making mistakes. In a couple of examples, we did massive U-turns after spending days setting up complex automations because we figured out a far easier way to do it. And that's all part of the process. And that's why it's so important to have somebody else involved while you're setting the stuff up, because it can just suck so many hours out of your day that if you're not careful, you end up just not having time to do anything else because you're just super focused. And if you're like me, you hyper focus something and ignore the world, and it can sort of get in the way of just running the business in general. So having somebody else involved is a hugely beneficial for doing this. And so this means that I was able to get a huge amount of the work done by somebody else with just my ability to be able to put down into a flowchart what it is I wanted the outcome to be. So when somebody, for example, purchases a product, this is what I want them to happen. I want the end result to be that they are on XYZ spaces in my community, they have access to my course, they receive emails after 1 day, after 3 days, after 5 days, and I can actually map that out really quite quickly and then give it to somebody else. And I gave it to my ops manager in this case and said, look, that's the end result. Go figure out how to automate that and make it work. And then just be there to support and answer questions, because you won't have got it all right the first time round. But the idea is that actually you then got a document, a flowchart, which you can then add to, adjust, modify, etc., etc. So you've got a working tool that allows you to communicate about the updates and changes. And at the end, and this is super important for future proofing, is that because you've got that flowchart that you've been working on as you've developed it, and if you make a big change, and we change the flowchart to reflect the new change, what that means is that at the end, we've got a document that explains how the automations work. And that is probably like as valuable, if not more valuable for the company in the long term, as training up that staff member to be able to create them in the first place. Because when that person leaves, and sadly, inevitably, most staff will leave your company at some point for some reason, we don't want there to be no one in the company that knows how it works, or at best, like that I would know how it worked, and then I've got to jump back in and figure it all out and train someone else up. But by having that documentation, that flow chart of this is what happens when this automation kicks off, it allows me to be able to remember 6 months down the line what the hell's going on, and B, if you have to bring someone else in, it allows them to see, okay, now I get it. Now I see that when this part of the automation triggers, it then fires off an email in our CRM, it adds them to our community platform, it updates their records in the course platform, whatever it is, it's being fired off and triggered off around in your business between all the different apps by using automation. We can see all that on a single diagram, and therefore not have to spend hours sort of trying to backtrack through and figure out, I'm getting the Slack message, but I don't know where it comes from, or this client's getting an email and it's got a spelling mistake in, and I can't remember what actually sends it off to send it to them. Like, there are so many things that can go wrong when you're setting up complex automations that if you haven't got a diagram explaining how it all fits together, it can become incredibly confusing when you're building it. It can become impossible or very, very difficult to unpick the problems further down the line. And if someone new comes in, then they're going to have a very difficult job of actually understanding how everything works. So if you take nothing else away from this episode, and if you're new to automation, some of this may be a little bit sort of not in your language or your terminology that you understand. But the one thing I want you to take away is that mastering process mapping before you start building out automations is the most valuable thing I think a manager or business owner can do. And then find somebody who's got skills in automation, or train some existing member of staff up in your company to be able to go and implement that, and then work with them to make sure you get the result you want, and make sure they update the documentation as they're going along, and as you're actually tweaking things and modifying it as you go. That's the big take home for today. Now, if you are getting into automation, there are a few things that I wish I'd known when I started. Things that, had I known them, I probably would have saved many, many painful hours and stress of trying to figure out, what's happening, where's it happening, why aren't things working, and actually prevented a lot of problems further down the line if I'd actually done these few things from the beginning. So I'm just going to go through 5 top tips on how to really future-proof your automations and make sure that when you get other staff members to do it, everyone's doing it in a standardized way. And that's what a lot of this is about. It's about standardizing how you set up, whether it's automations or anything in your business. Like having standard ways of doing it so everybody does it the same is hugely, hugely valuable. Otherwise, you can end up like we did with hundreds of tags in our CRM that no one knows what they do, automations sat there that we're not really sure if they should be on or off, different naming conventions for all sorts of things. It's very hard to see how things are linked together, and basically a bit of a mess, for a better word. And so a couple of things. Firstly, whenever you're building an automation, there's so many options you can have for each one, and often those decisions of what options you're going to have, so whether you're selecting a certain field to update, or why am I actually putting this automation in, like what this part of the automation in. So for example, we have a calendar booking system so that someone books through our calendar system, which syncs with my calendar so they can't get a conflict meeting. And then that creates an event in our community app. And between the calendar booking system, which is on our CRM on Go High Level, and our community platform, which is Circle, there had to be it's called a formula basically to change the date from one format to another format, calculate the time zone, and then it would actually create the right event at the right time. And this took a little bit of thinking and figuring out to do. But once we've done it, rather than just having these actions listed in our automation, we just put some notes on it to explain, like, why did we bother creating this? So somebody coming in later can read the note and go, yeah, now I understand what this is for. So I know that if I make a change to it, this is probably like something will break. And so putting the big tip at number 1 tip is put notes on everything that isn't absolutely obvious. Some things you can get away without putting notes on, but the more notes you put on, the easier it will be for you and for other people to understand what you've built. And this is a lesson that I got from my days back in university when I used to do coding in my computing degree. Like putting comments on every line of code or every section of code or whatever to explain what that block of code does means that other people can understand without spending hours and hours trying to figure it out. And this is no different. Creating automations in the modern world is just like building a computer program, but without having to do any coding. You're pulling in blocks of code that people have already thought about and created, and then you're just creating or updating some fields, and then it works just like a computer program, because in the background, it is a computer program. It's just that you don't see that on the front end. So thinking like a programmer in this example is really useful. And that is to comment on everything, to explain to other people and to yourself in the future what the hell things do once you actually set them up. Okay, top tip number 2, organize everything in folders. So automations like files in your document system, in your cloud storage, can be put into folders. And same with many CRMs, they have the ability to create folders for your workflows or your automations within those. Now, grouping automations together into folders, it may seem like a really obvious thing to do, but often you have to think about it as you have to create the folder. You then have to move the new automation into that folder in order to keep it organized. But doing that can again make it so much easier for you to go and solve problems in the future. When there's an issue with, I know, for example, we've got a folder for onboarding actions. We've got a folder for member admin, and it's also like a new community. We've got folders for all sorts of things. And what we do is we group all the similar automations together in the folders to allow us to be able to A, find them more easily, and B, not get totally overwhelmed with this huge long list. And again, this is something that we didn't do in the beginning, which is why I'm making a point of it. That little bit of time about thinking about organization of where you're going to put things is just the same as if you were to have your Google or your Dropbox or your OneDrive and just have a long list of thousands of files. you wouldn't do it. You create folders and you group things together. And so automations should be exactly the same thing. The next thing is, and this is a big one, is to include the URLs of the triggers and the actions in the right place or where they need to be. And let me explain what I mean. So when you set up many automations, they will trigger other things. So for example, we have an automation that when somebody makes a purchase of a product, they are added to our CRM, and that happens via a webhook. And a webhook basically just pings off a task to another app. So imagine it's just basically saying, look, this thing's happened, this trigger's happened. So in this case, a purchase is being made. I want you to go and set up a contact, for example, in your CRM. And so we use that as this example as a webhook. Now that webhook is basically just a website address, like a URL. And so in the CRM, all we have is an automation that gets kicked off by this webhook. But there's nothing in that to tell us where that webhook comes from. And it's very hard to tell from the actual URL itself, like where it came from. In fact, in Zapier, we can't actually search for a automation by the webhook URL. So you can't actually find it. So you've got to remember and figure it out. And in the early days, that's not a big problem. You've just got a couple of automations and you remember where they come and go to. But in the future, when you've got dozens of automations or different people getting involved or new staff members arriving, remembering or knowing where things are triggered from is so, so important. And conversely, what is triggered by the action that's happening within your automation tool. And so really simply, if, for example, the webhook triggers an automation in your CRM, then get a workflow in your CRM, then get the URL, get the web page address for that workflow that's being triggered and put it as a note in your automation in, say, Zapier, and vice versa. Put the Zapier automation, which is triggering the workflow in your CRM, get the URL for that and put it as a note in your workflow in your CRM. So you're basically just putting the source URL and the destination URL in both places. And that allows you to easily just jump back and forth between the two. And you don't end up in a situation, again, like we have done so many times over the years, when we don't actually remember what is causing this thing to happen. And that can waste hours and hours going through trying to figure it out. And even when we had like half decent process maps, sometimes it's not obvious and sometimes you forget. And so therefore just doing this one thing will make it so much easier to solve problems further down the line. It's so important, in fact, that, for example, when you send from an automation, say Zapier, and send a Slack message into your Slack channel, if you use Slack, don't use Slack, it's a communication tool a bit like WhatsApp for business, highly recommended, by the way, then it automatically adds the URL with the Zapier, the Zap that's basically triggered it, it automatically adds it onto the message, because they know that actually having that means that you can remember where the hell this came from. And so therefore you put it on automatically, you can switch it off, but they leave it on that automatically. So it's a great example of big companies that have thought, like, this is so important, we're going to actually standardize it, that it always happens unless you choose for it not to happen. So it's not just me making this stuff up. This is super, super important. Okay, so number 4, use standardized names for tags and custom fields. And I mentioned this before, but it's so easy when you're getting into CRMs, when you're getting into automation tools, when anything where you're basically creating things like tags, custom fields, etc., that you just sort of go at it and make this stuff up as you go along. But just like your automations, in fact, I should add to this list standard names for automations as well. So standardize everything. So come up with a naming convention for everything. So for your tags, come up with a naming convention. For your custom fields, have a naming convention. For your automations, have a naming convention. So for example, we have one of our naming conventions is we use square brackets. So we have square brackets and the word product, square brackets, and then whatever the name of the product is. And then we'll have like what the automation is, and therefore, the tag is. So this is for a tag, for example. So we'll have product, free your time course, and then the name of the actual tag. And that means that we can know that this tag is about a product. And similarly, we have tags for sales, we have tags for marketing, we have tags for operations, and we prefix them all with the square brackets so that we can remember where they are in the departmental scale. And then we go into the next level. So for this example, it's the product name. So we know this is a product tag to do with this is a tag to do with this particular product. And then finally, a little short description about like a few words saying what the tag's actually for. And then on that tag, if you can, add a description. So if the tag, for example, triggers an automation when it's added to a client record, then put the URL of the automation that's triggered. Whether it's within your own CRM or within something like Zapier, put the automation URL in there, exactly what I was talking about before, and also a description of what it does. So somebody who's looking at it for the first time can see this tag fires this automation and it does X, Y, Z. And a really useful thing as well, if you are, I'm going to come to this in a second, actually, I'll pause there, I'll come to this in a second, my final point. There's another point about adding notes on to tags. Come to that in a second. So standardizing the way that you name everything, whether it's automations, it's tags or custom fields, means that you can group things together easily. You can find them easily. You can be more confident that you know what they're for. And therefore, when you need to update things or you want to clean up all the mess that you've got, you can know, okay, this is probably not going to break anything because I know really clearly what it does. And then, as I said, if you list all the automations that say a particular tag triggers, unless your CRM does it automatically and you can see that, but actually sometimes it's outside of the CRM that the tag does something. So for example, you can have in Zapier, you can have a Zap listening for when a tag is added. So we can have, say, in Asana, which is our task management tool, we can say when we add a tag to this particular task, it triggers off a Zap in our Zapier tool, or it could be in a CRM. When this tag is added to this contact record, it'll trigger off a Zap. So there's no way of knowing that's going to happen from looking just at the tag. So that's why adding those notes in is so, so important. Okay, last little tip is about using your unique identifiers for when selecting tags and things for automations. So let me explain what this means and if this is totally unfamiliar to you. So when you are using automation tools, you often get to do things like, as an example I just explained, like when a certain tag is added, do X, Y, Z. And this is really common. This is often how things are triggered, or you may even use it for like segmenting or like having different paths. So you can say, like, you could have a catch-all saying, whenever a new member is added to my core site, trigger this app. And then you may have different paths. So if this member is a standard member, do X, Y, Z. If this member is an elite member, do ABC. And so we can then select. So we can say, if they have an elite tag, go down route A. If they've got a standard tag, go down route B. And here, this is what I'm talking about. When you then select the tag or whatever the project or whatever it is, when you select it in your automation tool, you've got the option often to either write the name. So for example, if I had a tag which was product level elite, that was my tag name. And so I can then say, if this contact record has the tag product level elite, go down this path. And I can either write that out using words and letters, or I can find the unique identifier, so the back-end code for that, which is often a string of numbers, and I can use that instead. Now, if you use the back-end, the unique identifier, it means that if you at some point change your naming convention or just change the tag name subtly to make it more meaningful, maybe you have elite level 1, elite level 2, and you want to change it from being just product level elite, it could be product level elite 1, product level elite 2, for example. If you make that change and you've written in the tag name into your path, it will break the automations. However, if you use the unique identifier that never changes, it doesn't matter what you call the tag or the custom field or whatever it is, it will still, the Zap or the automation will still work. Now, if this is new to you, then I encourage you to bookmark this episode and come back to this when you start getting into automations. If you are already getting into automations, I hope that going through this and giving you those 5 top tips of the biggest mistakes I've ever made is going to help you to make sure you don't make the same mistakes and you don't end up in the messes that I have over the years, and that you will actually create useful, meaningful automations that will work now and work in the future, and also that other people in your organization, as you grow your business or you switch out staff or you just want to stop being involved at all, that other people can understand what is happening, how it's happening, what it affects, what triggers it, all that, by simply being better at naming conventions, at documentation, about linking things together, using the right types of unique identifiers. These key things are probably the lessons that I think would have saved me, countless hours if I'd just known this from the beginning and done it right. So I really hope this has been useful. If it has, then please do hit me up with a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Would you like some more detailed, complex, detailed podcast like this to actually help you to improve some of the more complex sides of business? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, please do share this with your friends, colleagues, loved ones, and anyone who you think will benefit. Because if we share the love, then people will love you for it. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you next time.